To set up user.following, which will return all of the followed users, we're going to use a has-many association. We saw this before with microposts, but in this case it's going to be has-many through the active relationships. It's right here. The syntax is similar to what we had before with has-many microposts, like this. Now naturally, in terms of the ID, which is followed ID here, we would get user.followeds, which as noted before is unnatural in English, so instead we're going to follow Twitter's convention and say user.following. So we'll say has-many following through active relationships. This has-many we just made. Now in the case of microposts, Rails knew to look for a foreign key called user ID because of the class user here. So that's what would happen here by default as well. But because it's called followed ID instead of user ID, as we saw here, we need to tell Rails what the source is. So the way to do that is source followed. One of the best ways to see the effect of this association is to write some tests. One of the great things about tests in this context is that they act as a client for the code. Because we're pretty far from having a web interface for this, and it's easy to get lost in all the abstraction. But the test code is nice and concrete, so let's take a look at it. Let's say test should follow and unfollow a user. So now what we want to do is write some tests that a user is not following another user, then have that user follow the second user, and then check to see that the following relationship has been established. In this context, it's convenient to introduce some utility methods, which of course we'll have to write. So let's define a couple of users. Let's call them Michael and Archer. Again, I'm just pulling these out of the user's fixtures. Just the first two here. And initially, let's say that Michael is not following Archer. So let's say assert not. And now I'm going to just make up a kind of utility method that I would like. Michael.following as a Boolean, so question mark, Archer. And then let's plan to write follow and unfollow utility methods to create and destroy these relationships. So Michael.follow Archer. And at this point, the user Michael should be following Archer. So assert this. And let's unfollow Archer. And now this should be true again, so should assert not following. You can save that. It's going to complain here, of course, because these methods don't exist yet. Let's go to the user model. These are methods here, like following question mark and follow and unfollow are methods on the user instance here. So let's put it here in the user model. Start with a follow utility, so this follows the user. It's going to follow another user here, so let's say other user. And let's think about what this is going to be. So this is going to create an active relationship where the followed ID is this other user's ID. You can look back at our table. Remember, we can create a relationship through the association like this. So let's use that. The followed ID will be other user.id. The converse of that, I can just copy this actually. I'm going to do unfollow This unfollows a user. And in this case, we're going to find by, where the followed ID is the other user's ID. This will return the object, and then we'll call destroy on it. You might wonder where's the follower ID in all this, and the answer is it's implicit because we know which user these methods are being called on. Indeed, if you look up here, it's basically because of this association here. Because the foreign key is follower ID, that's the user's ID in this context. So looking at this diagram, the follower ID is always just the current user's ID. So finally, we can do this. Here's our following question mark Boolean. And now we could find the relationship and see if it exists, but there's an even nicer way to do it. Actually, let's do it that way. Let's do it that way first, and then we can refactor it. Active relationships.find by followed ID is the other user .id. So if this exists, if this is not nil, then following question mark is true. So we can say bang.nil question mark. So this is nil if the user isn't following the other user. And then we negate it here with the bang. So let's save that. We might even be green. Nope. Oh, wrong number of arguments here. Right, because the following question mark method needs to take an other user. So let's just do that. That's pretty obvious. Now we are green. Great. I just mentioned, though, that there's a more elegant way to do this here. Because of this association up here has many following, there's a user.following. Remember, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get this user.following. So inside the object itself, inside this model, we can do self.following. That's that collection of users that this user is following. We can treat this like an array. In particular, we can call the include question mark method on it and see if this other user is in that list. You can see we're still green. And of course, as usual, unless we're doing an assignment like down here, we can omit this self dot. I included it here just because we have user.following here. So that's the structure. This is user.following, but inside the model, we can just do following. And that's it. We can now create a following relationship using this follow method and destroy that relationship using unfollow. So this is a working backend now for the user following and unfollowing. All right, there was a text box there indicating that there's a better way to make these follow and unfollow methods. So let me show you how to do that. This is thanks to a reader who wrote in. It's really quite obvious, actually. I'm disappointed in myself that I didn't see this before. But we can treat this following object through the association as an array. Remember down here we do following.include question mark. This treats it as if it were an array. So we can use the shovel operator. It's the same as the push method. We saw it back in lesson 4. And we can say following shovel operator other user. You can save it here and run the tests. You can see it's still working. And down here in unfollow, we can do this. We can do following dot delete, and then just the object we want to delete, the element in the array. Again, it's not technically an array, but we can treat it like that. It's one of the cool things about Ruby and Rails. You can see our test suite is still green, which is an indication that these are working. So this is a much cleaner way of following and unfollowing users. Rather than talking about the active relationships specifically, we can go through the association and use these array methods. Much more natural.